Hi students, we're going to go through some of these videos together quite often. The reason why I want to go through today is so when you come through to class tomorrow, we can do the perspectives handout where we're really looking at all the different schools of psychology, the branches of psychology, if you will, to identify how people will organize themselves in psychology. So hopefully we got through this slide right here. So now we're going to go on to some other perspectives. And the first one we're always going to start with is the psychodynamic. Now, if I refer to it as the psychodynamic or the psychoanalytic, there's a little bit of difference, but essentially they're the same thing. As we get further along, you'll understand that they're kind of the reason why one is called one. Anyway, if you have heard anything of psychology or any one of psychology, it's probably Sigmund Freud. And the reason is because he's kind of like the tree trunk, right? Like he is what allows all of the other branches to come off of. And so the psychodynamic theory is very much, the key words are going to be like the unconscious. Freud always looked at the unconscious thoughts and how responses were motivated by childhood experiences. So you're going to look for words like the unconscious, the past, childhood experiences. He was very much rejected for his sexual overtones. Like everything had kind of revolved around sex for Sigmund Freud. And people were really like, Freud was in the late 1800s. They were very much appalled by what Freud was saying, which is why so many of these other branches came along. But it always had to do with what made you who you are and why you act that way today. Not even so much act, just do and think and say the things without even knowing it. So like if you take a look at this picture, this was what Freud would do. You know, he's kind of one of the first ones. He wants you to just kind of talk and get this free flowing, it's called free association, without even thinking. And there's where he's going to get into the unconscious. It's what you're not saying is what Freud wants to talk about. Those things that are really uncomfortable, those things that you just want to hide, those things are what Freud would have tried to get to. So the psychodynamic is always in the past. The next one is the cognitive. Now, when you hear the word cognition or cognitive, I want you to associate the word thinking, like think. When you hear cognition or cognitive, say to yourself, think. It has all to do with how you think, how you retain, how you understand things. When we look at therapy today, if you see a therapist, if you see a psychologist, they're really probably going to use a cognitive perspective because we want to get to like, what is it making you think like that? Like what is giving you the anxiety or maybe depression that is making you think in that way? So it helps understand mental activity, mental disorders, not like how your brain works, but why your brain works. There's a thinker, old statue of Rodin. The next one is behaviorism. Now this is a really important one because between cognition and behaviorism, that's where we get a lot of our modern techniques today in psychology. But behaviorism has really old roots, and the one guy I want you to associate with behaviorism, there's two, but two guys. The first one is John Watson. Now, John Watson is a strict behaviorist. John Watson literally only cares about what you do, only observable behavior. He doesn't care what you're telling him. He doesn't care like what you feeling, what you're thinking. Only observable behavior is what he is concerned with. So like the old structuralists, like it doesn't matter to him because he's like, well, you can lie to yourself. You can say whatever it makes you want to make me believe it, whatever. He only cares about observable behavior. So what John Watson did is, well, pretty much unethical today, but it provides a lot of insight into where we are at with behaviorists today. So John Watson, he's a scientist, a psychologist. He takes this little baby. This baby is a real baby. His name is Baby Albert. Like we don't even really know a lot about Baby Albert, but Baby Albert was an orphan. And Baby Albert is about 10 months here. Well, this woman right here you can see in the picture is his nurse. So like it's like John Watson's assistant, but she's a nurse. She's also like taking care of this baby in the orphanage when John Watson needs to like use him. It's kind of bad. What John Watson famously said is, give me 10 healthy infants, like healthy infants, and I can make them into anything I want. I can make them into a musician, a beggar, a dancer, like a lawyer. Like I can make anybody anything. It could, if I'm a horrible artist, I'd be like, no, Watson, you can't make me into an artist. Watson would say, I can make you into an artist from the point of birth. Like I would have needed to shape you. I would have needed to control your behavior from early on. So what he did with baby Albert is tough. He brings it, in this case, you can see if you look closely, that's a bunny in front of him. He brings this bunny to baby Albert, and baby Albert's like, oh, great. And like at first he's a little like, oh, okay, I don't know what it is. And eventually baby Albert like really enjoys playing with this bunny. It's a real rabbit. He like touches his fur, he pets him. It's all great. Well, what Watson would start to do is baby Albert would be presented with the bunny, and like he'd bring the bunny out, and instantly he'd make this loud crashing noise. He'd be like, and just shatter this kid's world. Like he'd make this terrible loud noise. And if you know anything about babies, like this baby would get startled. Babies don't like loud noises. It's very scary to them. And so he would do this over and over. He'd give him the bunny, make this loud noise. And this trained the baby to be scared of the bunny. Like before he wasn't scared, but now he's scared of the bunny because he's associating the bunny, that's a key word, associating the bunny with this loud, scary noise. And so now, look at this poor child. Like before he's like, oh, okay, I guess this is okay. And he eventually really warms up to him. Now, every time he brings the bunny out, he's like just frightened of this bunny. In fact, John Watson doesn't even have to make the loud crack anymore. Like back behind, he just has to bring the bunny. And now he's shaped his behavior. In fact, he's done it with many different animals. One time his nurse puts on a mask. He does it. Well, then he actually can reverse it and go back and do this again. So this is a really tough story, but it tells us a lot about what we can do to change people's behavior. The next guy is a really important one. His name is B.F. Skinner. I don't even know what BF stands for. I think I used to at one time. But Skinner is really, really important. Skinner thought a lot of himself. He actually had like a cult following where he called them like Skinnerites or something like that. But he studied conditioning and how consequences shape behavior. So he said, okay, if you do this, then this is going to happen. And he's like, if you do this 10 times, then maybe this is going to happen. If you don't do this, then maybe this is going to happen. And so this is what Skinner looks like. And we'll talk a lot about Skinner as we go. But no behavior, shaping, getting people to do, like even today, have you ever heard of Noom? Noom uses a lot of cognitive and behavior techniques. It's a way to like lose weight. You do things to like literally stop your behavior. Like you want to have that bowl of ice cream and you have to like do something maybe to not eat it, or you have to do something in order to eat it. And so Skinner studied how consequences shape behavior. It's a really important one. So think a lot about just the action, the physical doing of something, not just the thinking, the doing of it. All right? The next one is the humanistic. 2 names you should know, Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. Now the humanistic is kind of like this idea of, in school we want to shape the total person in the fostering of Christ. This kind of whole idea that we are human and we become human with many different aspects, and we are going to be the best version of ourselves. So for people like Carl Rogers, they were like, you know what? I'm not going to compare you to your sister. Or like, you don't have to be as athletic as your brother was. You be the best you can be. And so they talked about the human potential and the growth of a person. Like maybe you're here, but you want to get here. But let's do it little by little. Like we can get there. We can get you to be the best version of yourself because you really do have a lot of potential. So that word potential is a really important one. Growth is another important one. They talked about this idea of self-actualization. And the idea of self-actualization is kind of like, oh, let me go back. You're going to get to this best understanding of yourself. Now, I will say as high school students, you're probably not there. It might be that kind of light bulb moment where you are just like, you know who you are, you know who your friends are, you're done like faking it, but it maybe hasn't come for you yet. In fact, most teenagers don't really have that self-actualization. Sometimes I feel like I know who I am, and then sometimes I still feel like I'm just not there. I'm not to my best potential. I'm not like self-actualized. And so for the humanistics, they always like, let's just keep pushing to be the best version of ourselves, like this virtue that always just keeps building. They rejected the idea that you're just behavioristic or you're instinctual. Like you're more than that. Like somebody can't train you like a robot or like an animal. You're much deeper than that. I said kind of like that aha moment where it just kind of makes sense that you know who you are, you know who you aren't, and you're getting to that real growth of life. Biological. We will actually start the first of the perspectives with the biological perspective because we need to have the foundation of how the brain works, how genes work, how the nervous system and the endocrine system all work to affect how we think, how we behave, all those things that we already talked about. And I'll give you a little insight here as to why I have these pictures. This is a picture of a neuron. You're going to know neurons really, really well. You're going to know all of those parts. You're going to be able to name them for me. So the biological perspective is going to look at, okay, you know, we probably talked about this in class a little bit. Maybe you don't make enough serotonin. Like, can you just tell yourself to make some more serotonin? Of course you can't. So maybe you need a little bit more help. So it's going to rely on maybe drug therapy, maybe medication, something else, because your brain just doesn't fire or think the same way. Then we have the evolutionary perspective. Remember Darwin, when we talked about Darwin, when he had this theory of natural selection? Evolutionary, and we're going to talk about this a lot, that our mental abilities aid in successful adaptation. Now that's like, okay, I don't even know what you just said there. As we go along, I'm going to talk about the evolutionary perspective of like, you will do things in order to, say, like preserve your life. So you start hanging around people who you know aren't going to club you on the back of the head to take your food. Like that's just an evolutionary thing. And it will help you be a more successful person. Unfortunately, you know, if you believe in evolution, that's how we get to this point. And then you see the guy like walking along, talking on the cell phone. And now we're starting to revert and he is looking down at the cell phone. And really maybe that's the whole goal here in society, is to get people to interact, to think, to not be reverting in our adaptations that we have made. And the last one, the sociocultural perspective. How our behavior and thinking is defined or affected by our society and cultures. Meaning, if I grew up in North Dakota and lived here all of my life, would I think and behave differently than if I were born and raised in Honduras? Well, probably. Like, am I still going to have like the humanistic perspective, and is my brain still going to behave or think that different, think these same ways? Sure, but might I be different? You know, the food I eat, the way I think, how I drive. Like all those things are definitely going to be different based on your sociocultural perspective. There's some other subfields of psychology: educational psychology, developmental psychology, social psychology. There's, a really important trend going on of like sports psychology. So let me give you a little quick mnemonic, and I'm going to go back here really, really fast. A way to help remember these perspectives. The first one, think about a thumb, right? Like you're always going in the past. Like this thumb is always pointed backward. Think about everything in this psychodynamic perspective is behind you, in the back. The cognitive perspective. Have you ever seen Winnie the Pooh? You know when Pooh is like, think, think, think. And he's thinking so hard. Cognition, think. Cognitive, think. Always associate those two words. Behaviorism. I'm not going to do it. But imagine if you see somebody holding up their middle finger. That show, like we know what that means, right? Showing that observable behavior means something. Like, right? That's a symbol of something. And it means something really big. But you have to show it, right? Like you could say it. You could even think it. But showing it, well, you just observe that, right? I'm not going to do that one. The next one, the humanistic. Think of the humanistic of like these four fingers are kind of like all coming together. They're all coming to branch together to really make a full person. The last one, the biological perspective. I got to play this. Have you ever heard of Pinky and the Brain? Here we go. Maybe. We'll see. Got to skip an ad. Can I skip ad? There we go. Okay.
Gee, Brian, what do you want to do tonight?
The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
Pinky and the Brain. It's Pinky and the Brain. One is a genius, the other's insane.
Okay, I think you get the idea. Pinky and the Brain. Think of the pinky as like the brain, right? This is the last perspective. Well, not the last, but this is the brain perspective, okay? Think Pinky and the Brain. And the final one, the evolutionary perspective. I don't have one for the sociocultural, but the evolutionary perspective, pretend I grew another finger. Like what if I grew a sixth finger? Could happen to human beings. We haven't always had 5 fingers. If you believe in evolution, we've only had 3 fingers, and they've been more like a claw almost. And so the evolutionary perspective, imagine if I were able to grow a 6th finger. Okay, so that's just a little bit of a mnemonic device to help you remember. I hope some of these tips help. I think as we go through the handout together, it'll really make a lot more sense. So, till we meet again, goodbye.